Ja, von meiner Seite auch ganz herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass ihr da seid. Vielleicht zum Kontext von Josys Vortrag heute. Das findet statt im Rahmen von einem FWF-Projekt von mir. Da bin ich mit dem Thomas dabei, noch eine Publikation gerade vorzubereiten. Und da spielt die Arbeit von der José eine ganz große Rolle für unsere gemeinsame Arbeit. Und deshalb war es eine schöne Möglichkeit, die José auch einzuladen und mit euch zu teilen, wie sie über Tierlichkeit denkt. Vielleicht noch zu eurer Information, die José kann selber auch noch mehr dazu sagen. Es ist jetzt auf Deutsch erschienen ein sehr grundlegendes Buch von ihr und ihrem Mann. Das war etwas schwierig mit dem deutschsprachigen Verlag, aber wir haben es hingebracht und wen das interessiert, sind wir jetzt ganz stolz, dass es das auf Deutsch auch gibt. Yes. Aber die José wird jetzt mehr darüber sprechen und ich hoffe, wir haben nachher noch eine angeregte Debatte. Da wir das aufnehmen, den Vortrag, würden wir vorschlagen, dass sie in einem durchspricht. Wenn es im Nachhinein noch Klärungsbedarf gibt, übersetze ich auch gerne noch, aber ich würde das gern ans Ende Ihres Vortrages setzen und Sie nicht unterbrechen. Außer es gibt direkt Nachfragen, dann natürlich schon. Dann auf einen schönen Vortrag. Wir freuen uns, José.
Yeah, you don't know that yet. But thank you for creating the right context for me to inspire you and to take you along this evening to this very intriguing title and subtitle, De-speciesizing the all-too-human mind, referring to several other titles that you might have come across in your studies. But the de-speciesizing is important because just like decolonizing, we still have so many thoughts and habits, even if one is an active presence in wanting to evolve and wanting to change perspective. But it's not easy to evolve and to actually get all these thinking lines out of our system also, because we have grown up as being human. We have grown up as being non-animal human, and that is a problem. So somewhere along the presentation, there's also a slide that says we cannot think our way back to a de-speciesized coexistence. We need to reconquer it with everything we are. And for that, this evening I will take you along in the journey what the Animality compass means in all that, what it means both as a direction to be able to see more and to understand more of an evolved coexistence, but also something that helps us to stay centered in our own beingness, not as non-animal human, but as human animal. So here we go. Maybe. Okay, so this lecture, this is actually the text from the introduction. It is the lecture that is based on the work of my husband, the evolutionary biologist Francesco De Giorgio, and his socio-cognitive approach to understanding animals as owner of their own experiences, as subjects not as a projection, not as a concept, but subjects, so not as a mere definition, but as an active life philosophy, something to be lived and experienced and preserved in every day. So also something that then brings a guideline for an evolved ethics. And the approach lays out the framework to be able to recognize and emphasize what all animal, human as well, of course, have in common, which is the desire to actually own experiences, to be informed by life. And to have also the understanding what we have in common, which is the understanding of a potential shared culture. And a common denominator, actually, of being a human animal, and well, that is why the title also refers to that, a compass to find back something that actually belongs to all of us, the need and pleasure to be informed by life instead of reacting to or upon situations. I'm going to figure out what the best position is to talk in the audio and to change the slide. I haven't figured it out yet. Okay, so we're going to talk about the paradigm change because the social cognitive model is a model of learning which also facilitated in the last decades a lot of possibilities for other human animals to actually recognize speciesism and objectification also of yourself. You can create an object of yourself. So not only of someone you live with, but also of you in an experience. So the possibility to break down filters actually in daily life dynamics, and of course also to recognize the little things of speciesism, but also big things of speciesism in a more institutional knowledge. And some of you already talked about that a little bit before, the continuous focus on species-specific behavior is one of the institutional foundations that is a huge obstacle for not being able to see someone as a subject. So if you learn about cats, or if you learn about elephants, you start learning about what should be species-specific behavior for an elephant. So if you have learned about an elephant and you see an elephant, you start looking for the behavior you have learned to be able to recognize the elephant and identify the elephant with. You are not able to see that elephant. It's even worse. There was an article not so long ago, I think it was about dolphins somewhere swimming in the ocean, and they had an encounter maybe with a snake, and there were observers who said, then the dolphin showed behavior that they weren't supposed to show. What does that mean? Well, that means that the observer studied dolphin behavior and the whole repertoire of species-specific behavior, and what that dolphin expressed, they didn't study that. So he was like, you're not a real dolphin. You're not expressing what I studied. We do this enormously also, of course, today with human animals, especially in more complicated dynamics of pedagogical situations. If you study a specific label, I would define it. If you study someone that is part of a specific label, especially today, where there's more and more difficulty of actually experiencing yourself in an interaction with someone else, if you have knowledge of that specific label, which is kind of like species-specific study, you are going to look at that someone to recognize whatever knowledge you have about that label. So it's becoming more and more difficult for us today to actually figure out how you can see someone for who they are in every moment. Because I can see someone I know here in this room, but I will not look at her in this case trying to figure out what I already know. Because there's always something else to learn, to be curious about. Never get used to you and to someone you care for. Because if you get used to that someone, if you get used to the knowledge you have, that creates a blockage. And the other cannot express something else anymore. If not, you've got an observer saying, you are showing an expression that you don't supposed to have. That is difficult. So the speciesist matrix, of course, and I already said something about that also in the human world. So yes, it created a discrimination between human and other animals, and I actually will read something from Francesco's. This is unfortunately for here, it's Italian. It's Italian and it's also published in Spanish, and we will try to get it in English in the coming years. It's called In the Name of Animality, and I will read the introduction. So I will read in English from the Italian. So we, human animals, we live in a reality that is actually built and based upon the distinction between human and animals. So it is based on a thought structure that defines the human as as special in some way, and special, more special than animals. So we create this huge gap between them and us. Then even who is us? Also not really clear. Because also in that pyramid, even if defining the human somewhere on top, then that human is also still a very specific human. It's not a 2-year-old toddler. It's always, well, I'm not even going to define it, but it's a specific human. It's not just all of us human. So this feeling of special, of course, has created a huge distinction between all the animal characteristics and of course also the human characteristics, trying to find the separation. But the intimate essence of being part of a world and of being in dialogue with that world has been completely interrupted by creating this distinction. Because losing animality for us, for human, but also for a lot of animals living in close contact, non-human animals living in close contact with human, of course, they also have lost that part of being able to be in dialogue with the world. Because we define ourselves as human as being able to keep ourselves standing with the ability to conceptualize. But we lose the possibility to be informed in every moment. So, for example, you are all sitting here. You are sitting, I presume, on some kind of chair. And you're you've got your arms resting a little bit on something. And you know that you are sitting on a chair kind of thing, on a construction you can sit on. You recognize it. Yeah? But for the moment, you just recognize it. You don't have any real information about what you're sitting on. So if you would now just take a little moment and figure out some kind of detail, I don't know, maybe you can see something of a wood-like pattern or the color, or maybe with your behind you feel it is tough, but maybe feel with your fingers if it's really tough. Do take a little moment, find the detail. Go find the detail. Be less human. Find a little detail. Find the detail maybe also of how the metal is put in the chair. There are a lot of little details. There are also stickers. Okay, so this you moving, finding details, having a little bit of curiosity creates a more dynamic world. A more dynamic world, well, this was little dynamic, but in that more dynamic world, it becomes easier to move. It becomes easier to be höflich, just to get it as a red thread tonight. So now there is a little bit of, this was a very small example, of course, but now you are a little bit more owner of where you are sitting. Just a tiny little bit. You're a little bit more, oh, I'm sitting somewhere. You're not only listening to me, you're also actually being you, sitting on whatever we could call this construction. That is a little bit taking back that possibility of being in a dialogue with the world. That is also taking back a little bit of a potential shared culture. Because if you are, for those of you who live with other animals, if you go home and you have a chair, I think you all have, it's a good possibility that you all have a chair in your house. If you live with another animal, you go home and you go and explore the chair, that is actually something that one of the animals living with you, whether it's a dog or a cat or another human, is something that they can notice. It's something they can get their own information from. It's actually the part that makes us have something in common. And just because we recognize things, we know how to function, and we know how to go on day by day, doesn't make it right to lose all the possibility to actually create a little bit of an adventure every day. Because in that adventure is our coexistence. So that species matrix in which we discriminate because we place human as superior, of course, with all the abuse and mistreatment and confusion it creates, we also create a void in that trying to be a non-animal human. We create a void because we try not to have that overlapping part in which we have something in common, the interest in being informed in the world around us. So we create a void in which we lose something of our own experience, and we lose the possibility, actually, the potential of creating a shared culture. So I created that a little bit with this drawing here. So this one, the first one is, we place ourselves, of course, on top of an invisible cage. And we've been doing a lot in the past decade, try to make all kind of coexistences more nice or something like that. I wouldn't even know how to, what kind of, so nicer training methods. We even ended up as modern human, with a technique for trust. What? So something is not really right. If you need a technique to trust, where is your shared world? Then you actually approach someone with a defined agenda, because you already know what the end result looks like. You have a technique to ensure that there is an outcome of an image that you can define as a human as trust. Why is that interesting? Because we don't know how to mix in an experience. Because if anything is interesting, it's interesting that a horse or a dog or a human has the possibility to trust themselves. And how do you trust yourself? If you preserve the possibility to stay informed in life, to be owner of your own experiences. Trust yourself sitting here by figuring out that you actually get to know the chair. So that is something you can find by getting an informed idea by the world you live in. So, of course, and I will get back to that, in the field of animality studies over time, we have been trying to figure out something more about the affiliative side of other animals, something more about the coexistence between human and other animals, something more about the relationship. But within the field of science, if we do not recognize that part that we have in common, if we do not see that everybody has an interest actually in figuring out in what kind of dynamic they are, then we are never going to go beyond the speciesist approach or the species definition, because we will continue to try and become a better human, not a human animal. Okay, so essentially, without owning your own experience, without the fullness of being informed by yourself, by the other, by your surroundings, by any given moment, it is impossible to recognize another without trying to look for a predefined image. This was the more complicated part. So, what we have been doing in the past, well, more than a decade, we've been usually focusing on being defined by species-specific behavior, or label-defined behavior also, if we want to. We focus on that behavior. We do not see someone's attention as something to experience. Like Camwell here present, a little bit of his attention and noticing that is already a shared experience. So we have more and more been following a kind of process optimizing mindset of behavior to be able to find protocols for any kind of occasion or any kind of characteristic also, actually, making it increasingly more difficult to see someone in their own experience. In all kind of, for those of you who work in company world, they have been defining people, human animals, by whether they are blue, red, or yellow. Just to give a simplistic example of how devastating the focus on trying to recognize somebody by a predefined category is. So if I am yellow, I don't know what it means, just imagine something. If I am defined as yellow, and for any kind of some situation I express differently, then those around me say, oh, you shouldn't express like that, you are yellow. I'm the dolphin all over again. So, and why? Because people want to optimize the interaction. But now, if you're not yellow in your interaction, I don't know how to interact with you. Yeah, that's not okay. Because life is actually hidden in the possibility to stay curious. So if somebody says, I am yellow, you might say, yeah, but maybe, who knows? Maybe some orange will come out of it as well. Maybe. So, the experiencing life is then, with all the definitions and all the labels and everything, is completely taken out of its context. And actually being in a dialogue in the world, with the world around us, is taken away, is amputated. And we expect non-human animals to do the same. They should, I don't know, get in a trailer. Because you will not die from getting in a trailer. Yeah, but someone should have the right to have an informed ID by what that means. Even what it means to stand in it, how to experience your own body. You have a right to be informed. An informed ID. This is Jack, who unfortunately is not here to inspire anymore, but actually Jack has inspired an enormous amount of people by his strong expression and inquisitive mind, by an attention that is so tangible that you couldn't miss it even if you tried to. In this photo that I, of course, choose as purpose, there is a huge attention. It looks like, you know, right in front of you. But he's actually busy with figuring out where he's putting his feet while walking towards me. So the eyes are just a direction, but his attention is on getting information from the ground, because it's a complicated ground. So he's trying to avoid pieces. So we would tend to react on the first thing we see. Oh, he's looking at us. Yeah, but he's actually busy with his own world. So this is one thing that I'd invite you already to take with you tonight. If you see someone, so you might see a first thing, and then ask yourself, oh, what else might be going on? Just not to get an answer, but for yourself, to see more. not to need an answer, actually, but to start flirting with the understanding of how everyone born into life should be able to get an informed ID every day of life. Not, okay, now you're 4 years old, now you know it all. Basta. Now an informed ID until your last breath. And that requires an active participation in collecting, acquiring of information instead of passive reception of stimuli. So a proactive presence, not a receiver of signals. And this is already a little tricky because in a famous book where species meet and where a dog ends up in doing agility, that dog is reacting on stimuli. So the human intent, of course, is an intent that says, okay, I want to do something nice. Yeah, but something nice is not something we can define once and then replicate it. Yeah, if I would ask one of you if you would like to sing, if you like to sing, I'm not going to ask. But maybe one of you, if I ask if someone is here who likes to sing, somebody might say, yes, I do. And if I then would say, would you please sing a song for us? They are like, why? Why? Because something that you like still depends on the context that you're in. Something that you like might also be different the day after. Something that you like should be very much resonating with the moment that you are in. We can't replicate, this is what you like, okay, so then we are going to do that until the very last day that you are alive. That doesn't work like that. If we care for interactions, well, we need to put in an effort and every day say, what is happening? Where are we? Where is curiosity? Where is your attention going? Where is my attention going? What story can we tell together? We did something this morning, very interesting, with Freya and Rana. So a story that is created of everyone involved, everyone's interest. So for a possibility to stay proactive, also for that dog or that horse, to see new things even if you are, how old? Yeah. Even if you are 20 years old, it's not finished, it's actually beginning. Beginning, oh wow, this is interesting. In this moment. Maybe tomorrow not. And tomorrow there's something else. So the desire and the intent to be in dialogue, to explore life, to be informed, that is the vital part for everybody. Whether you are, again, a dog or the elephant or the dolphin who was like, okay, new information, new situation, different expression. Why? Because I was in dialogue with the world around me. So what we did as human, actually, we put ourselves also in that invisible cage. Not being in dialogue anymore, trying to express the expected behavior, becoming dependent on the right behavior, becoming dependent on other animals expressing the right behavior. If not, we are lost. If you have a good intent and you go to, what could be an easy example? You have a good intent and you go to, oh, we will get to the, there will be a good example in a little bit. So this is a Dutch drawing. I will show now the short English translation. It was used, it was my contribution to a research figuring out how society and the label definition tendency impacts, for example, if you have a diagnosis of autism in this case, and how the focus on behavior belonging to that specific label or finding then becomes everything. So again, you do not see where somebody's interest is anymore. You try to recognize what is part of that label. But we do that also with, of course, a young child or with anybody. A young child is now following a very precise protocol of what it should do when it's also very incorrect, when they are 3 years old. And if they don't do it, you get into this little circle. Because the focus is today on how someone behaves, not what they are exploring. I was in the airport coming here, and there was a 3-year-old girl, and she was exploring everything. But then she started to run and yell, and there the parents started to pay attention because of the behavior. But it started with the exploring, and the running and yelling came out because she was lost in her exploring. Only with your parents near, making a big effort in figuring out where you are, but having a static presence. That creates a complicated situation. What would be interesting is to go along and say, yes, indeed, there are little lights here. Why not? It's part of where you are in that moment. And that makes everything more fluid. So instead of figuring out that somebody is having an experience, we wake up when we see a behavior. And then we start to focus, especially when there is a mismatch. Today, a dog that barks already has kind of almost a mini barks. That might annoy somebody. Yeah, but he barks. So the question is not, should he not bark? The question is, why do we live in a world that allows us to be irritated by a bark? We had a couple of years ago a group of people. I asked them to walk around blindfolded and to figure out what they heard, what sounds were part of their dynamic, their dimension. So a little bit like what you did with the chairs, but I asked them, okay, so map where you are with the sounds that you hear. Then after not so many minutes, like a couple of minutes, I asked them to come back, and somebody came back highly irritated because he said, I couldn't hear anything because there was a dog barking. So I said, oh, wow, so there's a dog part of your map. He did not appreciate that. But that is how easily we define, instead of becoming curious, we get more and more easily irritated because we live in a smaller and smaller world of curiosity. We make our world smaller. The smaller the world, the easier distractions become irritating. The bigger your world, a distraction is actually, oh wow, new adventure, good. Yeah, dog barks, what might there be? Oh, it's me. Interesting. So that focus has become so definitive, actually, that we have become capable of completely losing sight of experience. And of course, with the tendency in animal studies of focusing on species-specific behavior, it's all behavior. Even if in the late years there has been some focus on cognition, cognition is still approached almost as, not almost, as cognitivism. Cognitivism is trying to figure out the proof of that somebody can do something, but then you're still focusing on behavior. While cognition is actually something else, cognition is referred to the ability to get information. So that means that sometimes cognition is also invisible. But in that mental grid that we created, with the species matrix, with the void we created in ourselves, trying to amputate ourselves from everything that seems more like, even if you are at what age are you not allowed to touch things anymore? At a certain age, you would hear somebody say, "Don't touch that." Why not? Don't touch that. Before COVID, sorry. Sorry. Don't touch that. So don't touch that, but then when a dog comes along, everything is touching. Touch the dog. Don't touch that. Touch the dog. Don't touch the wall. Touch the dog. So we created a mental grid, and with the mental grid, I mean that our attention has become very linear. So we focus on one thing, then on something else, and then we react upon something else. We do not experience in a bigger map. We do not experience in a world. We are not in dialogue with that world. So what we see here is actually something that we all have in common. We do not see species-specific behavior. We see a cat observing, like you are observing the slide right now. So we see a cat observing to get information. You are looking at the slide to get information, to figure out what you are looking at. That cat, Dan, is figuring out what he is looking at. And he is looking at not Derrida. He is looking at Lars and his twin brother. Lars is looking at Dan. Observing, cognition in action. Getting information about the existing of the other. Dan, the cat, getting information about their movements, the fact that they move. Getting information about that you're moving on the ground. A lot of information going on. There's actually also another cat sitting a little more up front. So what they do here is also going back to kind of the being polite. So everybody preserves also the space for everybody to stay in their own questions. So what is interesting about this photo is that nobody reacts upon each other. And to refer to this morning, nobody is shooting arrows. Nobody is reacting upon each other. Nobody is expecting a reaction from the other. Why not? Because they are already in a shared dynamic. They don't have to react. I see that you exist. Hello. You don't have to do anything. Because they are able to be informed. Then growing up, everything becomes a little messy. Growing up, we start to forget that we are in a dynamic in which we can feel the ground, for example. Or a dynamic in which we can feel the water running down from our body when we are naked coming out of the shower. So when then a cat observes you, you are already in your own experience. You don't need to become embarrassed because you can actually follow the cat noticing you. And maybe then you can figure out, ooh, maybe there's also a different smell. Something. You can figure out that you are part of a shared dynamic. The more we react upon each other, the more we try to have a reaction to define ourselves in that situation, the more complicated it becomes if somebody does not react upon you. So maybe you can imagine, have you ever actually had your own experience of another, also human, of any kind of other animal observing you? Figure out and think of a time that somebody was observing you. I could start observing you. What? And it's uncomfortable if you get lost in the observation of the other. It's not uncomfortable if you can touch your chair and say, oh, look, I am in an experience. Somebody is observing me. Yeah, and that way, you can actually mix in a dynamic with the possibility of becoming an experience for the other. So with the possibility to preserve, asking questions to the world. And we grow up in a society where interaction with other animals is not based on a dialogue, is not based on figuring out the curiosity to be able to observe. It's not based on a shared experience, but typically on one of the following. And the most typical, of course, is a reactive interaction. So the reactive interaction would be, ooh, cats. Here I go, a little theatrical, eh? Cats. I love cats. Okay, and then you would be which cat, actually? So you love the concept of cats. And then we say, no, no, horses, I'm afraid of horses. Which horse? So we tend to have like a stimulus, either a positive one or a negative one, but not in between. I love men. My husband. So to get to know the other, that requires something else. That requires the absence of a reaction. If not, it's already blocked. Yeah, somebody coming, oh, I love horses, can I touch them? I didn't, what? So what does that mean? Do you love the idea of a horse, or would you actually like to get to know that horse? What is it that we can do actually in our interaction with other animals? Not what we can do with animals, what we can do in our interaction. We can experience ourselves and figure out if there is space for a shared adventure. That is what we can do. But we try to get an affirmation. I want to show that I am nice to you. Well, okay, you experience you, and maybe I get an informed idea and I figure out myself that I actually am interested in you. We look for affirmation. So, of course, there are many examples of projection, like dog best friend, horses freedom, stuff like that. And of course, there's also the usage. And we will get back at the end of the presentation on a little more critical note of the huge upcoming development of the emotional support animals. And those of you who've known me for more time, you know that for several years, we made a lot of contributions on different conferences with a critical stance on the assisted therapy development, which was really difficult to do because everybody was so enthusiastic that hearing a critical note was almost impossible. But it's still going on and on and on. It's totally not acceptable because the intent is nicer because you don't use a dog for hunting. Bad. No, you use a dog for the emotional support of a human in need. Good. Why? If a human is in need, we need to figure out as human how to facilitate the human in need. Why does another animal need to be produced to become something that helps a human in need? That's not logical. And it actually desensitizes us of our own responsibility and possibility to mix with other humans. Yeah, to pick something up from a higher shelf because it's difficult to reach out in a supermarket. To be more involved in a shared world, not to try and put other animals to make it invisible that there is actually a PTSD problem. We should put in discussion how on earth that continues to develop, not try and figure out how to please a world because there's new research that might give some relief. That doesn't make any logical sense, but then again, speciesism doesn't make any logical sense. So the fact that that is developing is logical, but it's not acceptable. So this is what we tend to do in our world. This is the reaction. We see somebody, we say, "Ooh, I see you." I say something, you say something back. I would typically, maybe Uli, I don't know if you remember, ask a question and I will not answer, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to, if I may, I'm going to use the example of that you just gave, that if you ask something and someone doesn't answer, that you remain a little bit with the feeling that it's rude, then of course it becomes your problem. While your question is your curiosity to the world. So of course it might be nice if somebody answers, but your experience, your quality of being in that moment cannot depend on the other giving the answer. We have learned that to be true, of course, as perfectly non-animal human. You should answer, it's rude. Yeah, you should not forget to be your own experience. Because what is actually rude to all of us is to ignore being our own experience. That is rude. Becoming dependent on somebody else to make you feel comfortable. And we do that because we lose the possibility to have a more fullness in experiencing, making our world so small that at the moment of a question, actually, of course, we become dependent on a good answer, because if not, we don't know what to do anymore. So next time, if you ask a question, then notice your shoes. And if somebody doesn't answer, you say, "Oh, I have shoes," I walk away. And if they do answer, then you're like, "Oh, wow, nice, I have an answer." Something like that. Yeah, but this is just to show how easy we become reactive. Reactive is not a crazy expression. Reactive is a more linear tendency. It's where you wait for a reaction. And in waiting for a reaction, you're not proactive in your own experience anymore. So we've mistaken reactions for social dynamics. But a social dynamics is a possibility where you can still notice the other. Not in the expectation of their behavior, but whatever, even in this example. Ooh, they're not answering. So what are they doing? Curiosity. Good? But of course, so this repeating a little bit, due to the lack of being an experience, every interaction tends to stimulate a reaction. And an interaction, one tends to look to a confirmation of your own existence. A controlling tendency, also not to be changed by experiencing the other, not to grow in the experience of otherness. This is a little bigger, but the essence is that in an interaction we become dependent of the reaction. And now, of course, the example was with another human not responding. But how do you imagine if you adopt a donkey and the donkey was, I don't know, had a difficult past. So you are there, I'm going to take good care of the donkey. But then the donkey does completely different things. And you try to show the donkey that you want to take good care, but the donkey doesn't confirm you in that taking good care. Where does that leave you? That leaves you in trying to fit the donkey in the right result so you can assure the donkey that you have the best intentions. Yeah, but the donkey already has their own life. So if we want to take care of somebody else, we need to become bigger in our ability to experience, not to stay stuck in getting a good confirmation. So bigger in an experience is a little bit, I'm going to walk. Video. From the reaction, from the action-reaction to figuring out a shared world. So, a shared world can be very little things. If I come home, when do I come home? Friday morning, if I come home on Friday morning, I might have this, and I come home, and Namit and Zoa, the dogs are there. Or no, probably I will have this, which I take off, and there will be some smell of something where I was in these days. So taking that off and having that somewhere and being in the mixed experience, figuring out that there's some kind of information that I can't grasp, but I can see that they are busy with it. I don't have to take in the same information to pay attention to their attention. I don't have to be a dog to recognize that Zoa has attention for something that is laying there. Okay? I don't know what she takes from it, but I can recognize the attention. And that is already something. And that part is a shared experience. If I come home, then she sees me. Hello, hello, okay. There's no affirmation necessary. It's information. I am back. Oh, José is back. Good, interesting. Okay. That's enough. Because it's an informed dynamic. And that informed dynamic actually preserves space to explore other things, to notice details. Part of a shared dynamic. This is an example of a group of people and horses that have been mixed in our studies for 7 years. Loa in the photo and me and some others. So in this situation, what you can notice again is that everybody is there, everybody is aware of each other, but nobody is reacting upon each other. Because everybody is busy with each other's information, with the dynamic as a whole, with an awareness of being part of a shared dynamic. Okay, so me busy with the scent, Loa noticing something there, somebody behind me moving towards another place. So there's a lot of things going on. And of course, this is not, if I would take all of you, go there and put you in the meadow, that would not happen. Because then there would be a lot of what? So, of course, that shared dynamic is something that is that comes from having a moment of adventure, creating a dynamic, being there in that moment. Then everybody is informed by each other. But in that moment, I'm not even exactly aware of the fact if there is a human or a horse next to me or one of the dogs in front of me. By now, after many years of knowing others, human and other animals, I don't even know exactly. I know who is living with who, but if somebody would ask, are they cats? I'd need to think for a moment. I need to think like, shit, are they? Debussy, yeah, is a cat, yes, okay. Good, fine, I found the label. Because they are all subjects. They are so rich in their beingness that it takes an effort. But the same is actually for the male-female. When people ask me, so are there more females studying with you? And I'm like, then I have to figure out, take an image of everybody. I have to think if I can put them in that category. I don't know, they are subjects. Maybe they are crocodiles. I'm not sure. Because everybody is their own presence. So being part of a species or a race or any kind of other label is also a little bit of information, but it's not defining for what you experience. What is defining for what you experience is if you are actually able to be in an experience, or if you end up doing an agility course where you are lost. Okay. So an informed idea of 8 horses living with us since they were young, part of our family, part of themselves as a family. They are brothers and sisters and a son. So what you can notice here, it's a little video. And what you can see is how they move with an informed ID. Not out of a habit, because they are in a completely new situation. We moved. They are on terraces, and they found out that one of the terraces have a little slope down. And of course, you can do the whole round, but you can also figure out how to integrate that steep slope. But it's a steep slope, so you're not going down everyone together. That creates reactivity. So you're going to figure out who is moving where, how you move, what you can do, because they act in complicity with their environment, with a geographical environment and with a social environment. So from the possibility to stay in an experienced life, stay in dialogue with life, be in a cognitive dimension, is something actually that we would tend to do also as human, because you would not want to end up in a void of stimulus response. You want to know where you are, what the possibilities are of where you are, how you can move together. So here we go. So you can see they come from up, but they figure out who goes down and figure out the spaces and distances between each other. And everybody goes down in a different way. Pioggia is actually doing the bigger round.
Amela.
So the interesting thing about a real social dynamic of really getting to know each other is that everybody is more visible themselves. Instead of starting to look more like each other, the subjectivity becomes more expressive. Because if you are more informed, there's more space to express. If you are less informed, if you try to adapt, well, it's finished. So if you try to adapt to everybody, what will be the result? If everybody tries to adapt to everybody, because they can't get really informed, they just try to, avoid mess. Everybody tries to adapt. Your expression potential goes down. So you start to look more like each other. That's a socialized context. If you are more informed by each other, a true social context actually creates space for everyone's own personal being in a world. Also, among those horses, you can see sometimes their looks of curiosity towards each other. They've been living together for 15 years. And sometimes they're like, what are you doing? That's me putting in words, of course. But it's that kind of look, a little bit of surprise, like, oh, huh. Because they stay curious to each other. They do not expect a known behavior. They definitely do not walk around with the big encyclopedia of horse-specific behavior to say, oh, you should do that, you shouldn't do that. It's not in the encyclopedia. No, they get informed by each other. Putting an unknown horse in there, that is not okay. Again, because they don't walk around with the big encyclopedia, say, oh, it's an unknown horse, but he has his ears forward, so we're all good. That's a really simplistic approach. That defining the right behavioral outcome is a guarantee for a correct living together. Very simplistic. You should have the right to get to know someone you are living with. Make sense? Should I rephrase that? No? Yeah, it's not about the right behaved dogs that have a problem with each other. Yeah, it's not up to them to figure out, you shouldn't try and mold them in the right behavior so all is well. They should have the possibility to actually figure out who they are in an experience, what you can do with each other, if there is actually space to live with each other. And we try to control behavior. We try to actually create some kind of a produced behavior coexistence, instead of staying curious to who someone actually is. So, understanding social dynamics as information. Because each and every animal is born not to respond to a function or to correspond to a pre-assigned image, but to listen to their own questions, their desire, their energies. And if I talk about animal, of course, it's also the human animal. Because animality is universal, an innate call to cognitively experience the world in your own subjective way. So that means that sometimes also a 2-year-old daughter will join a study experience, because going to a river and climbing the rocks is, again, universal. And it's not about getting to a defined end, it's actually being able to stay in that experience. So also in this case for a mother, it's actually interesting to figure out how to climb the rocks together with her daughter, not so much to get her daughter to the right position where we are continuing some kind of presentation or something like that. It is about the possibility to actually own that experience together. That complicity also with a city. This is an urban wilderness fragment of someone from Spain and someone from Italy and someone from Poland, also somewhere else. So mixed in feeling and discovering the adventure in the city, owning the city. Touch the city. Don't touch that. Touch the city. Walk around, go to a wall, touch the wall. You would say, why would I do that? Because you can. Because you can, and it makes it actually possible to feel a complicity with the road you are walking on. It makes it possible to be aware of yourself. It makes it possible to become emancipated from the outcome that you need to get to a new place, to create a new result, to affirm yourself that you're actually living. It's far easier if you go and touch a wall. Touch a wall, oh, I'm living. Interesting. Yeah, the fact that you are going to an exam makes it a little less important that the exam goes well. Might stay something interesting, but it doesn't define you being alive. You being alive is the possibility to touch. I'm going to touch a wall. That is actually fresh wall. A little bit of information. Those little moments of information, without dwelling on them, touch the wall and get on your way. Don't go and stand there. No? Just get little pieces of information. Because instinct is cognitive. The desire and need to be informed by life in any given moment is natural, universal, throughout your whole life. If you are able to touch a wall, it also becomes easier to go on an adventure with a dog. And if that dog stops somewhere, you're like, oh, we are somewhere. And then you will find something interesting. You do not depend on what you had in mind, where you were going to. If we arrive there, then life will be interesting again. But you are already in life. Figure out that you're sitting on your chair. Because animality is a biological instance that unites all of us animals, since the dawn of time of evolution. Francesco, as an evolutionary biologist and anti-species ethologist, is very, very explicit, very, very centered, maybe sometimes very radical, but radical because it is so essential. We are part of something called evolution. So animality and the possibility to be informed by life is not something that is all of a sudden something that is different from us and other animals, just because we think it needs to be. No, it unites us. Because wanting to figure out that there is a map or study material, yes, it might be different what we notice than what this cow notices, but the possibility to have questions, to pose questions, that is universal. Shiva walking on a piece, this was actually, Rana, you were here. Yes. So walking on the piece of paper is actually owning the dynamic, figuring out what is going on, getting in an impression and information of the paper. Not being an annoying dog. It's the dog part of that dynamic, getting their own information. Oh, we're going to skip this. And if we do not experience the dynamics of an interaction, a dynamic of a situation with who are you there, but only that reaction funnel, then of course there will be less room for dialogue actually, and there will be more focus on action-reaction. Also what we said before is actually asking a question, not getting an answer, and then remaining a little bit like, okay, I don't know, because there's more focus on, there's an action, there should be a reaction. But figuring out how to emancipate from that mechanism actually liberates you from figuring out what else is there and who else is there in life, from being able to find different adventures, also from being able to not to have so many expectations towards the others you live with, whether it be another human, another dog, another cat, a rabbit, a chicken, or whoever. Not so easy. So this is somebody that is very interested in what we're doing, somebody that every now and then works with us. He helps also with figuring out the needs for the olive trees. He's very interested and intrigued also by all the animals, me and Francesco included, living at Spartaland. And this is, but it's not so easy to figure out where that shared space is, of course. So this is Athena the goat. You can see that she's coming up. And she's coming up because there's an unknown human and she wants to own that situation. So she comes up to get information. What do we see as perfectly prepared modern human? What do we see? Oh, a goat. What are we going to do? Oh, a goat. Let's pet the goat. Yeah, but the goat is getting up to get information. We are really simplistic when it comes to other animals. Why would petting be all that we can figure out in a coexistence? So Athena comes up to be informed, to say, you, unknown you, let me see what information I can get. The human goes petting, because it's the only reaction that comes to mind. Athena is like, what? So then, of course, the human says, okay, so I'm at loss, I don't know. So if I'm not going to pet, what am I going to do here? Yeah? And there we get the Derrida awkwardness. I can see that there is an interest, but what am I to do? Well, experience the fact that you obviously have information. Where Athena is going to smell. Figure out, oh wow, so my hands have information. You can experience that. you can experience the curiosity of the other. And from there, for Athena also, something else might. So then Athena, of course I know her, so I can see. Then I said, okay, now if you make a fist, then now you will have a more physical interaction, which in her particular case is something that in being there in that expression, expressing herself a little more strongly is interesting. But that is interesting for, well, first it's interesting to get information, and then maybe a bit more of an emphasis in an interaction, but definitely not being petted. But then again, you have to know Athena. And not only know Athena, because I can't say 2 minutes before, okay, this is going to happen. Depends on the situation. Depends on her intention. And then part of a shared dynamic. You don't have to react, you're all there. So, like I said in the beginning, we cannot pretend that we can think our way back to understanding animal subjectivity. We cannot pretend that better thinking fills the gap between human and other animals. Yeah, if we think hard enough, then that gap of distinction will be all good again. It's not enough to think better. It's not enough to become a better human. We need to become better human animals to expand in a culture of being able actually to mix again in experiences with others. Be an experience. So this is a group who was actually in the Netherlands last Thursday, I think, facilitated by Francesco in being, and they started in a natural context, because that might facilitate a possibility for a human to say, okay, I can do something different. But they ended up in the middle of Den Bosch, in some, I don't know, some shops, I don't know what shops. And kind of this movement, also like, oh, look, there's a little shirt, huh? And walking backwards in the store, not too far, just 2 steps, walking back and then going out and saying, ooh, I owned that store. And to be able, again, to feel complicity with the city, but also with yourself. To be able to go in a store without feeling that you are depending on whatever is happening there, but to be able to create your own narrative. And also a little bit of narrative for everybody sitting on the terraces, watching everybody in the row, like with a beer in their hand, watching, oh, we're sitting on the terrace, it's so nice. And then all of a sudden, Animality is evolving right in front of you because Francesco's in the Netherlands. So, little experiences. Maybe something that someone noticed, but not too much. Again, because it's also not interesting to create reactivity in those who are sitting there. Yeah, so, a little bit. You can touch a wall. Nobody gets perplexed, actually. There are a lot of hidden spaces that you can own in the intimacy with yourself without making it awkward for others. Yeah? So this is Gabriela with Rea. Be an experience. So here you can see that shared dynamic is not, it's not like this, but it's more like this. Does that make sense? So a shared dynamic is literally something you share. It's not that. Because in here, everybody also keeps the space to figure out that they are in a shared dynamic, but also themselves. Like this, it's very difficult to stay in your own experience, not to get annulled by the other. This is Rana. Be an experience. Why? Because high up, you see Freya and Santos, I think. So observing, think about the cat, Daan and Lars, the twin of the twin brother. This is already something. This is already part of a shared dynamic. This is a human being an experience for a horse. Oh yeah, you can see them too. And the geese. So in the question, what do you do with your horse? Oh, I create theater. What? Other theater. And sometimes, of course, that culture, mixing in that culture, if you think about, we live with 5 pig sisters, we call them the Titan sisters, because it allows us as human to figure out a little bit more, because they come from a rescue situation, but then we get into, oh, they're rescue animals. They are the Titan sisters. Ha! Huh. If you know that they are the Titan sisters and you encounter them, you're a little more like, okay. Yeah, so figuring out how to facilitate a human attention to see more is also, of course, important. And they come from, well, this situation, they came to us, they are 5 sisters. They were 3 months old, not so big. Now they are significantly big. And they are very intense, like really, really intense. So also being agile in mixing with them, but being part of their adventures is important, because they are a big presence, so you need to be physically also very agile in moving and in having these little interactions.
Beh, che bella sozza.
So with one of the sisters, Astrea, so of course you can look at this image like, oh, there's a big dynamic going on, but it's also a lot of taking in information, both from me as from her. It's like, okay, where are you moving? Where's the camera? What are we doing? Where are you standing? If you're moving, are you still standing stable? Where is your head going? Where am I sitting? So there's a lot of information from both of us. And they insist on having you as an active presence, because if not, you create misunderstandings, which is not interesting. So it simply continues like this.
Rating. Lato.
Other side.
C'è l'albero qua. Voilà.
Just exploring where I'm sitting underneath me. So what is interesting there, of course, is now this is a bigger interaction, but with all that information, we also create a lot of information of each other. And so also when there will be a moment, if, I don't know, something can happen with a teeth or with something, if people say, well, how do you do that if something happens? Well, you make sure you have big adventures when you grow up with each other. Because from big adventures, you have solid, informed ideas of each other. So for Artemide, me checking something over her ear is not so strange. Because there's already a lot of informed shared dynamics, part of our culture, part of our map. Is that clear? We, as modern human, we amputate ourselves, we stay away from these mixed experiences, but then we think that an animal, non-human animal, should be perfectly able to stand still if something happens. Yeah, but that other animal has no idea what your hands do. What your head does, what it means to be touched, to have an interaction. So an informed idea is something that is born from living together. And then if something happens, she already has a very good idea. They come to me to say, look, I've got something in my eye. Okay, I will get it out. Because they have a lot of knowledge of a possible dialogue. which requires also for all of them, the pigs, us human, and the horses, a cognitive body. So a cognitive body is a body that knows to be informed. Also back to the video with Artemido, of course, I am checking, okay, what is happening everywhere, but I'm not thinking, what am I going to do now? Then you're always too late. You stay informed, you stay in dialogue with the context. Your body also knows how to move. Yeah, so a cognitive body means also a possibility to have more possibility, actually, of a shared experience, of course. And it's possible to go beyond, to be emancipated animals, thinking alongside each other or experiencing alongside each other, in which everyone involved can partake in each other's adventures. So we can learn again to preserve our own human-animal cognition as a first step to being reciprocally, good night, to be both involved in exploring and experiencing the world with other animals, accepting a paradigm shift and growing towards a more modern and ethical coexistence between human and non-human animal. And where does it start? It starts by figuring out that you can explore things you know. You can explore your house. You can explore a street that you're moving in. You can explore your car.